Welcome to this episode of UXD, where we will talk about what user research is and how you can use it to make better products that users will actually want to use. I'm your host, Nazmul Idris, a developer advocate passionate about design and mobile, and I have a very special guest with me today.
Hi, I'm Rich Fulcher. I'm a designer and manager on the Android team.
Thank you for being here.
Thanks.
So Rich, from your personal experience as a designer, why is user research important to building great products?
Well, I've always been able to benefit from user research kind of throughout my career. I feel that it just helps bring me closer to the people who are actually going to use the products that I and my teams help to design and build. That's been true for me at a big company like Google, where we have a large research staff.
Right.
It's also been true for much smaller companies that I've been a part of as well. Kind of thinking back to my very earliest days as a designer, like my first class in what was called human-computer interaction back in the day. That very first class we talked about, that this is the study of users in a context, making use of tools to perform tasks to achieve their goals. So that kind of those 5 important things: users, context, tools, tasks, goals. Are really what research helps us speak to.
Right.
As a designer, I have a lot of responsibility in kind of defining the tool. What does your program look like? How does it work? And I get a little bit of influence over the task. What are the steps that I put you through, or how is it kind of divided out into different pieces? Research tells me a lot about those other 3 areas as well. So it tells me about the users, a little bit more about who they are. It tells me about the context that they use these products in, and that's both kind of environments and just kind of state of mind, and a lot of different factors come into play there. And importantly, it tells me about their goals, not just kind of get this thing done, but why do they want to get that thing done? What are they trying to achieve in their lives that is the reason for this product?
Cool.
So, Nazmul, what do you think of when you hear the term user research? Like, what's the picture in your head?
So I think about a lab in an office. I think about being part of a usability study where other people watch me actually use a product that's already been built to see whether it makes sense to me or not. Is that right?
It sounds like you're kind of describing like that scene in Ghostbusters where Dr. Venkman has the students come into his lab in university and does an ESP test and electroshocks a few of them. But that is basically right. That's one form of testing. That's what we'd call usability testing or in-lab usability studies. And that's a very common type, and it's probably the one that most people think of as kind of research when they think of that in a canonical form. And those focus on kind of tools and tasks that we just talked about. So, there's a tool there. We're asking, can the user use this tool to complete the task? We give the user the task when they step into the lab, and we just kind of see, well, did they do it successfully? If they did, how long did it take them to do it? So time on task and task completion.
Right.
But there's a lot more that we can do in research than just that. It's not just testing. That's really important to kind of remind people about. The broader goal is bigger than just kind of validating, is this product working or not? What you want to get out of research is a richer understanding about all of your users. You want to understand their perceptions and their expectations. You want to get insight about them that you can apply not just for this one thing that you're testing right here and now, but you can apply to all the future things you might build for your users. The next version of the product, or a new product that kind of relates to that same audience.
So now that's starting to sound a little bit like market research. Is that right?
It's definitely related. There's definitely some overlap between those disciplines. Certainly at kind of how they conduct, set up experiments or do data analysis. There's certainly common elements there. I think about research. Market research is more kind of focused on demographic or marketing data that's a little bit more divorced from task and goals, but can still speak to user and context. Maybe things like purchasing behavior that tie into that. But user research, I think, is a little bit more focused on kind of the user's day-to-day behavior. What does the user want? What do they need? What are those big, capital G goals that we talked about earlier? How do the different contexts affect their ability to use a product? If I'm If I've got a phone and I'm just kind of using it two-handed, that's a different context than if I have a latte in one hand and I'm one-handing the phone and I'm also running to catch a bus.
Right.
It might be the same product, might be the same tasks,
Exactly.
same tools, same tasks, same goals even, but the context is going to make that a very different experience for the user.
Exactly. In fact, we have an episode dedicated just to context.
Oh, perfect.
That's going to air soon.
Great.
Cool. So now, those seem like really big questions. So how do you even ask users those questions?
Those are huge questions, and you're not going to be able to answer all of them in an in-lab study just with usability testing.
Well, that makes sense. So is this where the expertise of user researchers come in?
Yeah, absolutely. On the surface, what a researcher does sometimes seems simple. It's just asking people questions.
I know I can do that.
Everybody can do that.
Exactly.
We can all be journalists. It's all simple.
Of course.
It's the same thing that designers grapple with sometimes. Oh, so you draw pictures.
Of course.
Oh, everybody can draw
Scribble like I'm a designer.
Yeah. I mean, in both cases, that just kind of belies the rich set of skills that an experienced practitioner can bring to bear.
Right.
And for researchers, they're particularly expert at figuring out how to get answers to difficult questions. So interviewing, just flat out asking somebody a question, is one technique that they'll use. But it is really just one of many.
Right.
A lot of the techniques rely on observation as opposed to direct questioning, so that it may be going to a user's home, into a workplace. It may be kind of bringing them into a lab, but not directly prompting them to do certain things, and just seeing how they behave.
It's like watching them in their native habitat.
Exactly. There is an anthropological aspect to this that is part of the discipline. And researchers complement that with a whole bunch of skills. One is in just experimental design. How do I set up a study to find the answer to this question? How do I pick which participants I should be bringing in to answer this? How do I mitigate the bias, based on this artificial situation I'm putting them in, or based on which users I select? How do I analyze the data and collect it?
Right.
And then once I've gotten those findings together, how do I actually bring those back to my team, to my designers, to my engineers, and really convince them of the importance of these findings? Those are all critical skills that a really good researcher can bring to bear.
That makes sense. Sounds like researchers are awesome, and they should be an integral part of every team.
Definitely. Throughout my career, which is years now, I've been most proud of products that I've shipped where design and research have had a really strong collaboration. One just makes the other better.
Right.
When you have a designer who really gets research and is an active participant in that process, whether that's they're helping to set up the experiment, or they're taking notes, or capturing video, or building a prototype, they just get more and more of that immediate information by being involved, instead of just kind of waiting for the findings or the report. And seeing things firsthand is always more powerful than just kind of reading about it after the fact.
That makes sense. It puts a human context to it.
Yeah, and it's definitely the kind of thing that as a designer I will kind of be working on something, and I will think back to a very particular experience I had. But, I remember when this user came in and they did this thing that surprised me. And I definitely draw upon that.
Cool.
Likewise, a really great researcher will have a good understanding of the design process, and they'll be really expert at kind of thinking about, well, if this is the process, I know how to plug in here or here or here, and I know for each of those opportunities what method is the right one that I should employ.
Cool. So now, speaking of plugging into the process, what are the ways you've seen research conducted at different parts of the product development lifecycle?
Yeah, so this probably is a topic that deserves its own episode. But at a really high level, I think when you're starting out on a project, you want to go out and observe users kind of in their natural environment.
Right.
The kind of things that you're looking for here are to challenge the assumptions that you may already have. So you may think users do this one thing, but by observing them, you see, okay, they do that, but they also do this other thing, or they do this thing in a slightly different way than I thought they would. So those kind of little surprising insights can be really valuable, and they may even shift the direction of your product as you see those. You can also just kind of learn about what already exists. So you can look at other studies that you've done or that are kind of published in the academic literature and things like that. You're asking this question, what's already been done? But really kind of the second order question is, well, how did that work out when people did that? So a little bit of that is like competitive evaluation, like looking at other applications.
That makes sense. So is this like testing a competitor's product before actually building your own?
Yeah, I think a lot of us do that already. People that are really involved with technology, we just kind of do this casually as a user. I mean, we use lots of different products, so there's a lot of input coming to us from just our day-to-day behavior. And we're thinking about an area. Sometimes it's because we've used something similar, or maybe we've used something that isn't satisfying for us, and we think we can do something interesting or different in that space.
Right.
This is just kind of taking that natural instinct to go and learn and making it a little bit more rigorous.
That makes sense. So now, after you've gotten started and you've chosen a direction and are actively doing development, how does research come into play at that point?
Well, I think research is best served when it's just as iterative as the rest of your development process. So as early as you can, you should get users to play with some version of your product.
Right.
And that could be like a working prototype. It could be just a bunch of screenshots that have maybe been linked together. It could just be pieces of paper. I've definitely done all of these forms of testing where for paper, you get to kind of play the computer and just kind of shuffle around the different screens and things like that. You're just trying to learn like what's clicking for the user, what isn't clicking that I can kind of come back to and iterate. This is a mantra you'll hear probably a lot on this show. But, make mistakes early so you can get over them and make things better in the next one.
Exactly.
You can also just use this to address any questions that kind of come up during the course of building the product out. There's almost always some kind of technique that you can use to help answer that question, even if it can't answer it fully.
Right.
If you're being forced to make a compromise on the product.
Yeah, that never happens.
Never.
Yeah, I've never heard of that actually.
Nope. Being able to draw upon research to help you resolve how to best make that set of trade-offs is something that can be really helpful.
Yeah, no, that's true. So now, as you get closer to the end of this development lifecycle and you're about to release a product, how does research come into play here? I mean, is this where usability testing comes in?
Yeah, it's definitely kind of the most typical time that you'll see kind of in-lab testing. So you get the working product there.
Right.
The kind of things you're doing, I think, best serving at that point are you're catching kind of final bugs. You're trying to kind of identify, am I really ready to launch this thing?
Right.
And in particular, I think it identifies the types of bugs that maybe your own team has just kind of habituated itself to and kind of overcome. So it might be like problems with the first use experience for somebody who hasn't been using like every version of the product you've worked on for the last 3 months.
Right, because you're biased, obviously.
Absolutely. You carry a ton of bias just from your experience.
Exactly.
But you should be kind of really apprehensive if this is the first part of research that you're doing at this point. Changes that you make here are really expensive in terms of time, of resource, of possibly delaying your launch.
That's why iterating is so important.
That's why it's important, and this is kind of, don't just wait till the end and don't just kind of do validation testing. Like, understand your users much, much earlier whenever you can.
Absolutely.
And then kind of when you're at the end, of course, like launching isn't really the end. Once you get the product launch, you can observe how live users use the product in the wild. Not just how does somebody use it 2 minutes after they've been introduced, but 2 days later, 2 weeks, 2 months later.
Right.
How has that changed? What do they need? What do they want? What don't they use? So you can look at logs. You can look at comments on the Play Store.
Right.
You can start at this point thinking about, well, what's that next release like? What's really, really critical that I need to have in there because it's still missing this for users? What did I think was going to be a big thing that I was going to kind of do more work on? But now it's just not important to users, so maybe I pull back from that.
Exactly. Yeah, no, because it's not like your application's ever finished. Like, just because you've launched a current version doesn't mean you're going to not do upgrades, and doesn't mean there's not going to be another version. So it's never really ends.
No, your work is never done.
If you do it right, it never ends.
That's right. That's a positive way to think about it.
Exactly. So what are some things that designers in particular are looking to get out of user research?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's always just great to hear users kind of talk in their own language and just kind of pay attention to the particular vocabulary that a user makes use of when going through your product, or even separate from your product when just doing their task without it. You can take that language and you can borrow it and include it into the UI. So that might be how you label an action or what you choose to depict as an icon or things like that. It just reduces the need for the user to translate between their world and your world.
It reduces the cognitive load and it makes it more intuitive.
Yes, and I think that's a lot of what intuitive to a user means is it's familiar to me, either because it's in the language I understand or it's doing things that I expect it to do based on other contexts.
Right.
I think that's what intuition is for users.
Exactly.
An example might be if the users might use the word settings, you might want to use the word preference because you think it's more kind of correct in some form. But if that's not the language the user uses, they have to do the translation work to come to your product.
Right.
You can instead do the design work to bring the product closer to what the user understands and just kind of spare them that effort. The last thing about language is it can also be a bit of a doorway into understanding the user's thought process. So like if you talk to a designer for more than like 2 or 3 minutes, you're going to hear the phrase mental model. And there, I've got it in, so I earned my badge. We love to talk about that. All that really means is how the user understands a process to work in the world.
Right.
And I've seen users construct both kind of vastly simpler mental models than the real model, and much more complicated things as well.
Right.
So one example is for a mobile device, battery usage. I see users in research who engage in all kinds of bizarre ritualistic behaviors because they have a mental model that says if I do these things, I will get more battery life.
Exactly.
So they swipe away recent applications that they're not using.
I do that.
You did well. There, now I've taught you something. It's all even.
Oh no.
Or they put the device in airplane mode, of course, as they're doing all of this, they're driving the screen at the highest brightness and keeping the display active, and actually possibly being contrary to their goals because the mental model doesn't match the real model.
Right.
And when there is that mismatch, I get very excited as a designer because that's a huge opportunity.
No, that makes sense.
Once I see, the user doesn't understand this, but if they could understand it, they would be more effective, or their battery would last longer, or things like that. So those points of difference are really interesting.
No, definitely. Another example to this point is the refresh button, where folks that are not familiar with basically data being pushed directly in the device might think that, there's no refresh button, so the data that they're seeing is stale.
Right.
But actually, it's being updated in real time. And they just don't have an awareness of that, and then that can actually be contrary to their sort of perception and expectation from the software. Like it feels like, it's not performing as well as it should because it doesn't have a refresh button, but in reality it is performing well because it doesn't have a refresh button.
Yeah, we try to be really careful as designers not to kind of create the opportunity for false rituals. Like by removing a refresh button that doesn't do anything.
Exactly. I'm
hopefully moving a user away from just kind of doing things to no benefit or to no end result. And ideally, I'm freeing up space to take a meaningless action away and put a meaningful action in its place, because I only have so much space to put all of these actions anyway, and the more actions I put, the less emphasis any one of them gets. So yes, this is very much what I do on a daily basis.
That's fantastic. So how does user research help other folks in a team? Because we've talked about the benefits of designers. What about benefits to PMs, product managers, and also engineers?
I think everything you do to kind of better understand your users can help. And I'm saying help. That's not the same as make your job easier. Because sometimes it's very easy to make an ignorant decision without kind of knowledge of your users. Research often will reveal that there's a lot more variability in your audience than you probably had in mind, and that can complicate some of your decision making.
So this is kind of like how user research allows us to, it's kind of like we get to create our own mental models of actual users, and our mental models might be overly simplistic and not actually match the reality of our actual users.
That's exactly right. The mental model we may have may be just kind of loaded with our own biases.
Right.
In a lot of ways, that mental model of who the user is could just be, they're me.
Exactly.
Because I know that person best, and I want to use this product. So
Exactly.
I'm obviously the user.
Everyone is just like me.
That's not true at all.
Right.
So by doing research, you can help release yourself and release the rest of the team from those types of biases and getting away from that kind of monolithic model of the user is me. This is also helpful in kind of making some of the debates about the decision and those compromises less kind of confrontational.
Yes.
Because you're not talking about, I want this and you want that.
Exactly.
It's our users are telling us this.
We're advocates for the user.
Yeah.
They're the stakeholders, not us.
And that doesn't mean the answer is obvious,
Right.
but at least we can kind of engage in an honest debate about the right way to try to satisfy a goal that we agree on. And when you have research, you can talk about what you've observed. You can think back to that user and tell that little anecdote about, well, that might be true for you, but I saw this user and they did this thing. It surprised me, but they did it.
Right.
There was a trick I learned from a colleague long ago, which is to be very conscientious about that bias by just repeating the word I when you're speaking about your own opinion. So if I say, well, I think the product should work this way, just saying it 3 times, it makes it clear that, which is important especially for a designer, that's me talking, not me speaking on behalf of the users.
Definitely, you're signaling to your colleagues that this is your own personal opinion, so they can treat it with whatever bias. I mean, look at it with bias that's built into that statement.
Yeah, and I think it's helpful for others, but it's also just helpful for me because that ritual that I have of doing I is there to remind me that this is what I'm thinking, not what others have shown me from research.
No, that makes sense. So that's all the time we have for this episode. I know. Thank you so much for being here, Rich. We will do many more episodes on the topic of user research very soon.
Great. Well, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. And if you haven't already, please be sure to join our UX community on Google+. It's a place where you can continue this discussion and you can meet others who are just as passionate about UX as you are. Thank you very much and have a great day. Goodbye.